border on the Serb side and turned all those people back. We've been speaking to someone from the OSCE this morning here in Kukas, and they tell us that these people have been sent back to their villages. But if the pictures that we filmed this morning are anything to go by, the houses being burned out, houses still being set on fire, then they're going to find very little to go back to in the first place.
One of the pictures we've just seen that we're showing now, Ross, we could see one lone figure wandering down a street. Is there any sign that there are people in these burnt-out villages at all?
No, and I have to stress before I tell you this that this is information that we gleaned from Albanian army soldiers who are up on that mountain. They tell us that the people that you saw there wandering down the street are Serb soldiers and Serb police who are looting houses and putting them onto trucks and driving them back to the customs house at the border. I must stress that we have no firm evidence of that ourselves. That's what the Albanian soldiers are telling us is going on, because they obviously keep a very close eye on what's happening on that border.
Now, do we know whether they're burning just the homes of Kosovo Albanians, as we've heard, and that those that are identified as Serb houses have an S put on the door and they're left alone?
I think that's highly unlikely that that would happen in villages around the mountains here. Certainly in the capital of Pristina, we've heard reports of that happening, of streets being marked as ethnic Albanian and streets being marked as Serb, so that special forces know that they can go into certain areas and know to stay out of others. All the villages on this border next to Albania are quite obviously ethnic Albanian villages. While we were in the mountains, we heard some artillery fire. We don't know where it was coming from. The soldiers again told us that it was Serbs firing into ethnic Albanian villages.
Ross, thanks very much for the moment.
Western journalists have been taken to Pristina, the capital of Kosovo, to see the damage inflicted by NATO attacks. Our diplomatic correspondent, Tim Marshall, who's based in Belgrade, has sent us this report.
From here they fled, and to here they must return. If not, what was it for? NATO's air raids have reduced large parts of the city centre to ruins. The telecommunications and post office building is rubble. So are many civilian buildings, including a shopping street. The city bank caught much of the blast. 9 civilians were allegedly killed in the raid so far, 15 injured. Most of the city centre is in ruins. You can't just see the destruction, you can smell it. The smoke on the horizon is from a burning fuel dump hit overnight. And between here and there, it's a ghost town. This was a town of 280,000 people. We're told that half have gone, either because of the airstrikes or at the point of a gun. We couldn't tell. The rest allegedly are in the shelters. Soldiers and police populate the town day and night now. A handful of civilians are on the streets, a few armed, some with guns, others only with their anger and tears. Perhaps this damage can never be repaired.
You're all idiots! All your people! Or your nation! Tell you people, how creatures are you?
Another blow. The city cemetery took a direct hit, possibly aimed at a nearby train track. Dozens of graves damaged, 5 or 6 utterly obliterated. The Kosovan regional governor showed us the remains of his government building. This, he said, was where the NATO politicians used to come for meetings. Never again. Some civilians were clearing up. They'll probably have to do it again. This cafe was next to what was a street of artisans.
This was the pride of Pristina. There you had the shops of Serbs, Albanians, Turks. All of the people, the shop owner here, all of them spoke 3 languages, and none of them was nationalist. And this, as you can clearly see, is a barbarian act, nothing else.
Pristina is the regional headquarters for where the Serbian operation against the KLA was launched. With all its terrible repercussions, those repercussions have come full circle. If the refugees can ever return home, they'll come back to a smashed city. The war is costing a fortune, and rebuilding during the peace will be the same. Tim Marshall, Sky News, Pristina.
Looking at course, it's been damage inflicted by both sides, hasn't it?
Indeed. I mean, the reporters who were going into Pristina said they heard machine gun fire in the distance. Now, who was firing the machine guns and at what, we don't know. It seems to me that NATO has hit the centre of Pristina pretty hard, and one wonders what the targets were. Up till now in this war, we've been very very precise on what we've targeted: bridges, government ministries, fuel installations, communication centres and so on. Why it was that NATO bombers appear to have taken out a large residential area
and a
in
graveyard.
Pristina and a graveyard. I mean, I think that the graveyard was obviously a mistake, because I mean, nobody wants to waste bombs. I think that may have just been a tragic mistake, but I do wonder where on the NATO target list the attacks on residential areas or targets near residential areas in the centre of Pristina come.
Refugees left Blace in 4 convoys of 9 buses each, with an escort of firearm police. It is now confirmed that they entered Albania. At the same time, the border was closed by Serb authorities, and indications suggest that the refugees on Kosovo side of Fyrom border have been collectively transported back into the Kosovo area. The situation is still unclear, and we are await for further information. In Albania,
This photograph shows field-deployed Fry main battle tanks, marked by the red circles, and hidden among the remnants of buildings. Houses which Serbian forces had previously destroyed as part of their scorched earth policy. However, we continue to improve our techniques and to refine our tactics to engage and destroy these fielded forces. We have been making the most of the improved weather. Yesterday, NATO flew nearly 400 combat missions over the former Republic of Yugoslavia and Kosovo. Air defense activity was normal. I can confirm at least 1 SA-6 was fired and that a MiG-29 took off but recovered to his home base very quickly, and we did not engage him. This graphic gives you an indication of the target areas we struck yesterday. The categories of our strategic and operational targets remain unchanged to what has become our regular pattern. I would like to emphasize that all targets were of military significance, and our concerns for collateral damage and loss of civil life remain paramount. In particular, you will be aware that yesterday the Serbian authorities arranged a visit by Western reporters to Pristina. Several news reports filed last night describe significant damage to the entire city. I can absolutely assure you that whilst NATO has attacked military targets around Pristina and one very carefully targeted MUP headquarters, which was struck very successfully in the city area, NATO has certainly not caused the reported widespread and random damage which we believe has been orchestrated by Serbian forces. I'm sure that closer forensic guided munitions. On the video I am about to show you, you can make out a road with Serbian vehicles on it. If you watch closely when the video begins to play, you will see that the pilot locks his missile to the target. Once the missile is launched from the aircraft, the video feed stops, but the weapon automatically guides to the target to which it is locked. The pilot then executes a rapid escape maneuver to avoid target defenses and the detonation of his own weapon. Unfortunately, that means you will not be able to see the result of this weapon strike. You can see the convoy on the road. It locks on the frame and it goes. If you want to see it more closely later on, then I'm sure we'll be able to run it for you. The next video I have shows a successful attack on an ammunition production facility. If you watch the right side of the image, you may see the bombs prior to their impact. You start to look for the bombs coming in now.
China and Serb transmitters, unless Western radio and television programs are broadcast in Serbia for several hours. Meanwhile, questions are still being asked about the disappearance of thousands of refugees from a camp on the Macedonian side of the border on Tuesday. NATO's Secretary-General Javier Solana says he believes President Milosevic could be planning to use the Kosovan civilians as human shields against military action.
Driven from country to country, the refugees listen out for news from home. They arrived here in Albania after an 11-hour journey over mountain roads, crammed into buses, they say, without food or water. We found them at this Albanian military base, just one group of the 10,000 kicked out of Macedonia. The old and the young sleep in these cramped quarters. There is about them a sense of bewilderment. In just a week, they've lost their identity. Teachers, lawyers, factory workers, all now simply go by the name of refugee. How do you feel about what's happened to you?
How can I feel? It's total disaster. You just can't explain it. You know, we are like lost in space. I don't know anymore what I'm feeling or what I'm thinking. We are very tired. 8 days in the field, in the rain, without shelter. I don't know.
They're busy making lists of who is here and who is not. For in the great exodus, families have been split up. It took the Serbs just moments to drive these people out of their houses. It could take months to reunite those who have been scattered. Back inside Macedonia, at one of the camps run by British forces, they were beginning to register some of the 35,000 refugees being taken care of by NATO. The plan is to move some of these people to other countries in the region until such time as they can return to Kosovo.
The next series of activities we must undertake is the registration, and we must make every effort to give them the confidence that there will be a solution to where they can go to, because they cannot stay here forever.
Of the thousands who were driven back from the border by the Serbs yesterday, there's no news. The border itself is silent, and the Serbs are ensuring that there's no free flow of information about the fate of those they turned back. As for the refugees we found in Albania, there is at least food and shelter, and they do now have the security of knowing they won't be pushed on again. These people have suffered brutality and days of unimaginable hardship. And although conditions here are substantially better than what they've left behind, they're still bitterly resentful at being pushed yet further away from their homes. Their overwhelming, unanimous desire is to go back to Kosovo soon. Fergal Keane, BBC News, Pogradic, Albania.
High Commissioner for Refugees, Sadako Ogata, has arrived in Kukës to see what more can be done. But that'll be of little comfort to those who didn't make it this far. An eerie silence has fallen over Kosovo. All we can see from our vantage point are burned out houses and deserted villages. There's no sign whatsoever of the thousands upon thousands of people who were queuing to come into Albania. Their fate remains a mystery. Ross Appleyard, Sky News, on the Kosovo-Albanian border.
Refugees fleeing Kosovo have been telling aid workers how they were terrorized into leaving their homes. They spoke of relatives murdered and forced separation from their families. Sky's Emma Heard has been to Stakovic in Macedonia, where British soldiers are helping young children deal with fears that they may never see their parents again.
They have shelter and food, but no one, it seems, can provide what these people want most, all their loved ones around them. Everyone here is searching for someone. Wives have been separated from husbands, brothers from sisters, and in the most tragic cases, children from their parents.
In Serbia's embattled southern province, a scene of devastation and disorder. The city now an empty shell of its former self. It was the day after multiple explosions tore through the city. The shocking aftermath of a NATO airstrike so powerful, say officials here, it was beyond belief. The central post office and telecommunications centre bore the brunt of an attack. Its roof caved in. Most phone lines were cut, deepening a sense of isolation. Collateral damage to many buildings appeared extensive. It included a bank and the executive offices of the Serb-controlled administration, now overlooking a rubble-strewn centre of destruction. Officials claim the attack killed at least 10 people, a mix of Serbs, ethnic Albanians and Turks. Some buried here, they claimed, beneath heaps of debris, splintered wood and smouldering embers. For visiting journalists, a glimpse of a now desolate city. The first on-the-ground independent verification that the very heart of the provincial capital has been severely damaged. Pristina held around 200,000 people before NATO dropped the first bomb. Now it appears to be a virtual ghost town. The streets are empty. Serbs, it seems, held their ground even as the bombs fell. Of the ethnic Albanian majority who once lived here, there was virtually no sign. We didn't force Albanians to leave. They went by themselves, says Milan Živković, a Serb. They couldn't live with us and left. But maybe they think they're coming back with NATO. Serbs blame NATO bombing for everything, for desecrating their holy places and triggering a mass exodus of mostly ethnic Albanians from Serb-ruled Kosovo.
People were trying to save themselves, so they left, but now some are coming back.
Without NATO, reports Serbian television, now claiming a refugee return is underway. If Serbs thought a self-declared Yugoslav ceasefire in Kosovo might end their nightly ordeal, they were wrong. The center of the capital was attacked for a second time Wednesday. A former army building came under fire. NATO delivering the same unrelenting message to the authorities here. Capitulate or face a steadily ruinous air assault. Brent Sadler, CNN, Belgrade.
Time ago, NATO officials gave their daily briefing in Brussels. With an overview, we're joined by CNN Jim Clancy at NATO headquarters.
E continua il dramma nel dramma, quello dei profughi, secondo il ministro della difesa tedesco. Nonostante la tregua unilaterale proclamata da Milosevic, continuerebbero i massacri, l'ultimo a Sopi, 35 i kosovari uccisi. In migliaia intanto sarebbero stati costretti dai serbi a rientrare nei villaggi distrutti nel Kosovo, uomini, donne e bambini forse usati addirittura come scudo umano.
La mappa della deportazione ora appare più chiara, ma i conti non tornano. Sarebbero 14.000 i profughi che non rispondono ancora all'appello delle organizzazioni umanitarie. 2 le ipotesi, il rientro forzato nel Kosovo o l'utilizzo come scudi umani. L'ONU conferma il rastrellamento nella notte scorsa dei 60.000 profughi dal campo fantasma di Blace ad opera della polizia macedone e la deportazione di alcune migliaia di persone a Korça, vicino Tirana. Qui i rifugiati hanno trascorso la notte sugli spalti di un campo sportivo. Domani le scuole del luogo dovrebbero rimanere chiuse ed essere trasformate in dormitorio, ma l'assistenza appare del tutto insufficiente. Altre 28.000 persone provenienti da Blace sono state caricate su pullman fino ai campi di transito di Brazda e Stanković. Altri ancora sono a Pogradec, in Albania, ma i responsabili delle organizzazioni umanitarie lamentano una grave carenza di viveri e sul governo macedone pesano accuse gravissime.
In Kosovo, and that peace had now been restored. There's been no reaction yet from NATO to this latest development. The alliance has meanwhile launched its Operation Allied Harbour, with 8,000 troops being deployed in Albania, helping to bring aid to the hundreds of thousands of refugees there. The humanitarian programme is scheduled to start at the end of next week. In refugee camps in Macedonia, Albania and Montenegro, aid officials are worried about the sudden halt in the exodus of refugees. NATO's Secretary-General Javier Solana suggested Serbian forces could be planning to use the refugees as human shields. The British government accused Serb troops of sealing off the borders and forcing refugees back to Kosovo.
In the middle of the night, the teeming squalid camp at Blace on the Macedonian border was emptied of its inhabitants. Herded onto hundreds of buses, tens of thousands of refugees were spirited away. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees says many of them are still unaccounted for. Thousands arrived here in Albania, where NATO said today it plans to send in 8,000 troops to help with the humanitarian relief effort. It said the measures it already has in place in the region are easing the situation.
The NATO shelter, after a journey lasting 5 hours, the city didn't appear to have been all that badly damaged by bombs. It was just that it seemed utterly empty. I walked around freely. Sometimes the only sounds were the crows cawing in the trees. We caught occasional glimpses of people in the quarter where, only a month or so ago, ethnic Albanians used to throng the streets. Now the houses are shuttered and the shops closed. The center of the city has been badly damaged in the latest attacks. This, rather than the empty streets, was what the authorities had brought us here to see. The target for the NATO missiles was clearly the telecommunications centre, which has effectively cut off almost all of Pristina's phone system. But nearby, a range of other buildings had also been heavily damaged. A bank, a library, the social security offices. And round the back of this complex of modern buildings was the so-called collateral damage. In these old-fashioned houses, huddled together, many people had died. It proved impossible to get an agreed number from the officials with us. One said 10 had been killed, another 20. Either way, it's been one of the worst civilian casualty lists of the war so far.
The extraordinary thing here is the silence. This used to be a city of 250,000 people. Now, apart from ourselves, there's scarcely any sound at all except for the occasional noise of a dog barking. In the air, there's the powerful smell of burning rubber, burning materials, and burning oil. And on the ground, nothing but rubble.
In the area where the bombs landed, most of the people we saw were Serbs. It's not easy, this man said. We go to the shelters every evening when they bomb us. Others were a lot more angry. What you can't see much of from our pictures is the large number of armed men, mostly from the Special Ministry of the Interior police force, who were around in the streets. We weren't encouraged to film them. They're now the particular target of NATO attacks, both here and elsewhere in Kosovo. But what's happened to the ordinary people of the city, in particular to the tens of thousands of Albanians?
There are Albanians in Pristina. As for the makeup of the population here, it hasn't changed much since the bombing started. As you've seen around us, the bombs have caused some displacement of the population. People of all nationalities are leaving. The bombs don't target one specific nationality, and so people of all nationalities have been leaving Pristina.
The officials decided it was getting too late to take us to the hospital. The night's attacks were expected shortly. So they took us instead to the city's cemetery, which had taken a stray hit. Pristina has become an empty shell, where the living get out or hide, and even the dead can't lie in peace. John Simpson, BBC News, Pristina.
NATO has denied causing widespread damage in Pristina during airstrikes in the last 2 days. It says Serb forces damaged many of the city's buildings, saying it only attacked targets.
They are effectively prisoners as well as refugees at this camp run by the Macedonian government. Hidden away in a valley in the mountains, it is the only refugee centre in this country which isn't under the control of NATO and the aid agencies. Many among the 2,000 held inside speak of poor conditions and cruel treatment at the hands of their Macedonian guards.
These soldiers here, Macedonian soldiers, they don't let us to get out, even to buy our money, to go to village to buy some food or drink for children or something like that. They don't leave us to get out from this case. They are treating us as an animal, as a criminal here. So we didn't kill nobody. We are just a refugee, and I think so we have some rights.
We tried to enter the camp to see the conditions for ourselves. But while the cameras are given access to the other refugees in Macedonia, this was a no-go area. Even NATO officials have been refused entry to this camp. Instead, local aid agencies are trying to bring food and water, but those in there say it's not enough. Despite the presence of Macedonian soldiers and police, some have managed to escape. We saw at least 5 refugees running out of the camp down to the neighbouring village. Many will be sheltered by the local Albanian residents. Mira Shahir Sufi escaped with her 3-month-old son. She's now living with a family just next door to the camp.
The Albanian families that take refugees inside their houses, they're very glad to do that, but the refugees are even more glad because they just want to feel a little bit safer than they felt in Kosovo.
But while the people of this village are sympathetic to the Kosovar refugees, most Macedonians are not. They want them corralled in camps, or even better, out of their country. Emma Hurd, Sky News, Raduša, Macedonia.
For more on the
NATO has continued to intensify its air campaign against targets across Yugoslavia. As in previous nights, the attacks struck at the military and civilian infrastructure across the country, although poor weather curtailed NATO's operation. Jets attacked an oil depot east of Belgrade, bringing down power lines, and also bombed a car factory. Thousands of Serbs formed human shields on bridges in Belgrade and in the northern town of Novi Sad to forestall NATO attacks. And European foreign ministers meeting in Luxembourg agreed to give an extra $270 million of aid to the Kosovo Albanian refugees. The money will be put towards setting up refugee camps in Albania.
For Serbia's Orthodox Christians, it is Good Friday, but NATO has ignored calls for a ceasefire. The campaign continues, and the overnight news from Serbian television had a familiar look. This was said to be an industrial area in Smederevo, east of the capital Belgrade, where an oil depot had been hit. While the flames filled the sky, other explosions were also reported elsewhere. One was said to be near a television transmitter. With the campaign well into its third week, Britain has claimed there's now even stronger support for bombing President Milosevic into cooperation over Kosovo.
At the very beginning of this action, I think the question that people were asking us was, well, is it really justified? Can he really be that bad? Does NATO really need to take this action? Nobody's asking that question now. People see the appalling, evil brutality of what he has visited upon those poor, helpless people.
But for another night in Belgrade, people protested about NATO's action. These rock concerts, organised by the authorities, have become a regular display of defiance. Meanwhile, on the international stage, Russia too said it was still looking for a way to stop the bombing.
There are meetings between officials from foreign ministers of the contact group countries going on in Europe these days. And we hope that the Western leaders understand that they must do something to transform the situation into a political process.
Serbian television has also been showing what was claimed to be the wreckage of an unmanned US reconnaissance plane, which came down in Kosovo. Whatever the facts behind that, NATO is brushing aside Belgrade's latest statement that peace has prevailed in the province. The alliance